Minal. I would like to call upon our next presenter. The thesis is going to be presented by Janvi Bhatt, a postgraduate student from Delft University of Technology located in Netherlands. The title of the thesis is Transitioning Towards Socio-Ecological Resilience in the Ganges River Basin through an Adaptive Spatial Planning Model in the Ganges River Basin of India, and was guided by Dr. D.A. Spelveda Carmona and Dr. I.R. Claudio Foraggi, and it falls under the theme of urban management. Janvi, would you like to share your screen?
Sure. Hello, hi everyone.
Hello.
Quickly share my screen. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah?
No.
Yeah.
Ankur, there is a little change, is it? In terms of, was there some sign then he was supposed to present? And
No, she was last. She was present. She's presenting at the last. After her.
okay, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Do you see my screen now?
No, it's not visible till now.
Are you on a MacBook?
No, it's Windows. Strange. Let's see. It's loading. Now?
Yeah, it's visible now.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Okay. So, well, my thesis is on urban management. It's more to do with the process than to do with the design. So it's a lot of text, but I'll try to go through it. It's about transitioning towards a socio-ecological resilience model, and specifically through an adaptive spatial planning model for the Ganges River Basin. So if we see the Ganges River Basin, it has its very social, economic, and environmental importance. It passes through 5 states in India, in Bangladesh as well. So it has, like, there's a lot of different management aspects to the river basin, but there has been a lot of exploitation that has occurred over the years in past. There's social exploitation, economic exploitation, environmental exploitation that the river has been through. So the whole idea was to see how we can look at this in a holistic manner. So the main problem of continuous population growth, migration, rapid urbanization has led to environmental, social, economic inequalities. Also, lack of participation in the planning process leads to spatial injustice in both distribution of resources and also the whole procedural manner of how urban management is done for the river. So my question was to identify and how we can deal with this injustice and vulnerabilities through an adaptive spatial planning model for the Basin River. And the whole roadmap was to identify what these situation or the current phenomenon is, how is the risk and vulnerability increasing, but then the counteraction was to test a model which is both a participatory model but also an adaptive model which changes based on the stakeholders involved, the situation of the impact that the system gets from climate change, and also change of governance, and how these strategies then, which can be a holistic strategy development, help into allowing local development and local strategy testing, which then also feeds into the system and gives an adaptive, continuously changing model for planning. So well, the first question started with what is this adaptive spatial planning model? Because it's a model that is new, and what does it mean for me? So the idea was to relook at what adaptiveness is, what is the current planning model, and what were the main focus where the system should highlight on, which was adaptive governance, which was evolutionary resilience, and spatial justice. And so this started with identifying a strategic objective, which was the socio-economic resilience, and then seeing what is the operational objective, which was the planning system, and then quantifying its current state, benchmarking what that future or desired state is, identifying the type of interventions which are both strategies as well as participatory planning, and then testing this whole model in one location at different scales, throughout scales, and then seeing if that helps again to feed into the system. So for the purpose of testing, and in the Ganges River Basin, there are, of course, it's huge. It has 3 different sections: the hilly sections, the flat plains, and the Delta River. So I did a vulnerability assessment through social aspect, environmental aspect, ecological aspect, and through that I identified one of the most vulnerable zone, which was in the state of Bihar, Patna. And this was then the testing ground for me to see how the strategies work on all different scales and how it feeds back into the system. So as part of the project, I developed strategies on the regional level, which was for flat plains, river deltas, and hilly sections. Each of these strategies were then further developed into actions, and actions were different based on the location. And then again, strategies were developed at metropolitan scale, which has its own layer of challenges, and then testing them at a local scale with stakeholders to see how does that whole holistic approach to vision actually work. And the main idea was, how do we make it adaptive? So for testing purposes, these were the strategies that were developed for the challenges of flooding, drought, landscape design, and planning. And under each of them, there were actions. Each of these actions, again, have different approaches based on the local, which I avoided for this presentation because it's a lot of layers of actions. But then was to how do we make this a holistic system, which probably one person in Patna Ward 1 can adopt, or local municipality can adopt, and one person in, or a group of people in some other ward or some other municipality can adopt. So the whole idea was how these pathways work. And they have these own testing points, which are like, for this one, it's 2024, which is the first milestone, and then 2028, which is the second milestone. And these are the milestones where you identify if the approach is actually working. But then the system also allows multiple pathways to go through. So the set of strategies and actions are something that you design at a higher scale, because that is something that will affect the whole ecosystem. It's a bigger ecosystem, and you don't want one intervention at one place to affect the whole ecosystem. So you have this overall vision for the river basin. You develop your set of strategies and actions at a metropolitan or a bigger scale, and then each of these actions have smaller interventions. And then based on the path that you take, so say you take a peri-urban area, probably your action starts at how do you reclaim green areas again, or how do you stop that urban growth from happening, and that will lead to a different pathway and probably a different solution. And then if it's a rural area, how do you take this same strategy pathway template and then go, and probably will end up with a different solution. But then this allows customization of interventions throughout the basin, but still allows the role or the vision to be one which is towards a holistic resilience system. And similarly also, how each of these projects will start. So if there are civil societies that are starting this project, there are NGOs that want to work towards something, because it's a huge basin and no one government can work towards it. So the idea was to develop a system that allows multiple stakeholders to work through it. So if there are civil societies, if they start a project, probably it will end up with a different solution. And if there is a public sector that starts a project, it will end up with a different approach. But then the idea was, like, each of these actions have its social impact scoring and ecological impact scoring, and spatial. It also identified what is the spatial impact of this intervention. Is it high spatial impact, low spatial impact? What is the cost? What is also the acceptance rate of these interventions? And then you test what your approach or your path ends up scoring, and that allows people to identify, is this going to be the plan of action for next 5 years or 10 years. So in more detail, where I tested my solution, it was going through each of these steps, and then each of these steps have a further 3 branch or 4 branch actions that are possible. But there are these intervention point or assessment decision points where the stakeholders, or what are the actors that come into picture, what are the instruments that will be needed for the next stage, and what will be the objective for next 5 years or next 1 year, can be identified, and a decision can be made based on the scoring system to see if that is the goal that we are moving towards. And of course, I mean, this is something that looks very optimistic, very possible, each government should apply to, but then comes the challenges in the governance system. And the idea was to also identify where the system can fail. So there is, of course, necessity of integration of different stakeholders, different multi-sectoral governance. There is also lack of capacity in terms of the locals who, at very local level, the municipality, mayors. So how do we identify those challenges? And as part of this project, I identified those challenges for the Patna region. And how can then we address our funds to highlight or to identify and make capacity building into those areas so that a system can manage to work towards a more resilient yet adaptive system of working. So yeah, basically that was the idea, to identify a bigger model where the role remains, or the goal of the whole system remains, to achieve a holistic development, yet create a system that is ready to absorb shocks of climate change, ready to absorb change of governance, and then we still move towards a single goal of resilience. So thank you for listening in to the presentation.
Thank you, Janvi. Ujjainji, would you like to say a few words on our work?
Yeah, I will be rather frank. Actually, I haven't understood this enough to comment. I need to sit with you for a couple of hours to really get to it. I really, first of all, I hadn't got it beforehand, so that time also didn't get. And today is 10 minutes, 5 minutes. It's very complex and very, looks has been done with a lot of work. Converting all these, thoughts into tables and diagrams and arrows and whatnot. I'm only afraid, I hope, looking at this model, people don't get scared and don't adopt it. I'm sorry, I may be lighthearted, but it could be a possibility. You know India very well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And you go and show this to one municipal guy, he will be very happy, give you tea and all that, but he will keep it. I don't think he will open it again. I'm sorry to be critical, but that's the reality.
No, I agree. Yeah.
So anyway, frankly, I cannot comment. I only love those little drawing, those 3D things. I want to take them and use it somewhere. They're so beautiful. But let me not waste time. I really can't comment on the actual content of it.
Thank you, Ujjainji. Clara, would you like to say something?
I kind of agree from a different perspective, but I also kind of find it very difficult to comment also because of the amount of information that you need to manage to kind of actually assess a matrix of this sort. It's just a massive endeavor to do in the first place, and to assess it, it's the same thing. You have to go through all that process to really understand what those steps are, to actually, understand what this ultimate goal that you're talking about is leading to. And each of those steps obviously, has repercussions as it moves through that kind of decision-making process, I guess. With that, I will comment on the presentation. I think it's super clear and very kind of on point, given that this is not something I am usually exposed to or I do. Assessments of this type. I think it's a approachable in a way. And I think if we were to have that extra hour, we could potentially, I don't know if an hour, but a few hours potentially get through it. And I think that is a great addition to this sort of tools, because I mentioned this before in other of your colleagues' presentations. Representation is one of the key things that we do as professionals. We transfer information from the very technical world to people who are going to build it, so even more technical, or people who are going to use it, that at the end have the saying of the success of this. And to a municipal person who might, I don't understand why open this and not open it again, but okay, like there's all these layers of people who will have contact with an assessment of this sort. And I think you've tackled, representation in a great way from my perspective, obviously biased and in my own context. Yeah, that's it, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Okay. Gary, would you like to say something?
Yeah, Janvi, thank you so much for the very, very concise presentation of what seems like a very, very complex thought process.
Yeah, this is probably like 5 or 10% of what's
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
So from what I understood, this is kind of like a top-down approach to strategic planning. And I find parallels of this in economics, because you have the macro level and micro level thinking there, the models, right? You have the macro models where you predict certain scenarios, and the micro models again. So I feel there's a certain relation to that in this. Again, it's very spatial in terms of approach. But then again, one of the last slides you presented was about the challenges, which I think is the biggest step in this. You can predict, you can come up with strategies, but then how do you implement it in a practical way, especially at the scale that you were looking at? It was not in a city, it was much more regional. It comprised of multiple governments. You had the central government and the state governments at stake. So who makes the decisions? And it's always not a government project, right? Things like this. There are private stakeholders. So I feel maybe it's something that you can add at some point is be having this central.
Yeah, the whole idea was like when you have an organization like Jal Shakti to deal with things, it was more like how can they then take the model to still make it bottom up but top down to make it work. So how they can take this system and go to individual municipalities, make things work, and then feed in again to the top down bottom up approach cycle. So
I think the top down approach at some point has to stop, and in this specific project that is, and probably it's about having a planning body that is like more central element that helps you. They know everything about every project that comes up in your state or in your region. Then they can probably navigate through each project and say this is how it's working. And also in terms of the models that you are testing, because what if they don't work? Then you have like 4 years gone, right? So maybe there are also some technological inputs that can come in here, some simulations they can probably run. I was helping a PhD student earlier this year, and she was running simulations to see how future scenarios look like. Of course, it's not perfect, but if there is a layer of technology integrated into this, that's also something that can go in. Again, just quick thoughts, but overall, I think it's brilliant thought process, and hope things like this come into India, and also the solutions that you're trying to integrate into the project as well.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you, Janvi, for sharing us your work.